Women have an advantage from a masculine point of view because they have a menstrual cycle. So you have a very undeniable physical reminder of your cyclical nature.
Hello guys, welcome to Astrology Insight. This is going to be a special episode, and why is that? Because I'm leaving. No, I'm not actually leaving, but we're replacing this kind of stiff Dutch guy in front of the camera with someone very special to me. She's my partner, and she'll be hosting these episodes together with Vincent from now on. So stay tuned and goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Astrology Insights, part 2 of this video. So that was quite the introduction I got there. My name is Amber Rose and I am going to be hosting the Astrology Insights episodes with Vincent from now on. I have been really interested in astrology for many years, but what I personally would term basic bitch astrology, Vincent calls popular astrology. Perhaps more PC. But I'm really interested in it. It's something that I work with personally a lot. I work with it a little bit in my work, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. And as Ricardo mentioned, I'm his partner. And so when I learned about this project that he was working on, I was very excited to get on board and be a part of it. And to also have the opportunity to sit in this chair and receive all of the wonderful wisdom that Vincent shares with all of you guys watching these episodes, but also with us. I know both Ricardo and myself have learned a lot by being in this seat. If you caught the last episode, then you would have seen me being a guest on the show talking about the upcoming eclipse. If you're watching this at some future point in time, we were referencing the eclipse of October 2023. So yeah, that's a little introduction from me. And what we're going to talk about today is kind of the intersection of my work and Vincent's work. So I work with cycles, or one of the foundations of my work is cycles. Primarily, this is women's cycles, menstrual cycles. On a kind of physiological level, on a health level, teaching women how to connect with their cycle, how to nourish themselves appropriately throughout their cycle according to their physiological needs, but then also to the greater themes of getting to know yourself through your cycle as a cyclical woman and using your inner cycle as a tool for self-awareness and personal development, spiritual development. And something that I love about astrology is that where my work is really pertaining to the inner cycles, astrology is really talking about the external cycles. When we look at astrology, we're also looking at the cycles of, the universe, not really the earth. How would you say that?
Heaven.
Heaven. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's actually the cycles of heaven perceived from the earth. Those cycles.
Okay. Can you expand a little more on heaven, why you call this heaven?
It's harking back on the ancient depiction of the world or the universe, which is different from our modern astronomical notion of the universe, which is huge. In the old days, when astrology got its form, the form it has now, the planets were perceived as spheres surrounding the Earth. And another word for sphere was heaven. So there were heavens, actually.
Okay.
It's not only in Western culture, it was also like in Chinese culture, for example. There were several heavens, and the heavens were associated with spheres of being, other planes of being.
Oh, wow.
That's in short why I was mentioning the word heaven. The word heaven in the Bible comes from this notion. You have these several spheres, and in Christianity, for example, they are populated by angels. And above all the spheres, all the heavens is God.
Wow.
That's the ancient picture of heaven. And hell was a hollow within the earth. The word hell comes from hollow.
Fascinating.
Yeah, well, that's
Absolutely
why I was
fascinating.
using this word.
Okay, I love that. See what
Yeah,
I mean? I've been
yeah,
sitting in this chair for 2 minutes and I've already just had my mind blown. So obviously, one of the premises of Astrology Insights, or if you're new here, then one of the core missions of Astrology Insights is to introduce people to astrology or to this kind of higher level astrology that goes beyond popular astrology, that's very, very specific, very individual focused, and to using this as a tool to develop greater self-awareness, to really know yourself, to really understand yourself, which, you know, the reason why I do this work with women in the way that I do is because I believe when you really know yourself, you can actually start to create a life that you love and that is in alignment with who you are, with your nature. And Astrology Insights is kind of working off that same premise of introducing Astrology Insights as this
yes,
amazing tool to
yes,
really get to know
yes,
yourself more.
absolutely.
Um, could you share a little bit, Vincent, about astrology as a cyclical thing, as a cyclical experience?
Yeah. Um, Let me see where to start. Well, technically speaking, astrology is based on the cycles of the planets and some points also, but I just reduce myself to planets around the Earth. So even if we have a modern picture of the solar system where all the planets revolve around the sun, in astrology, um, you take the Earth as a center of your perspective and you just look at the heavens like the planets revolving around the Earth. Or maybe to put it differently, just to how heaven looks looking from the Earth. And more specifically, looking from the place of birth of a certain person and the time of birth. It's actually quite an exact map of heaven on the moment of birth and also the place of birth. And it's all cyclical in the sense that they all cycle around the earth. They all cycle around all the places where you might have been born on earth, every moment in time. Um, that's actually the basic toolkit of astrology. And it's not so much a discovery, it's actually a deep intuition in astrology, in many people from very ancient cultures, that time in itself reveals meaning. So it's not so much that they have been assigning meaning to a certain position of Mars there and Venus there. That's not how it went. That's more meaning by association. That's more of meaning on a superficial level. The basic intuition of many, you might call them seers or priests or shamans, is that the life force evolves or expresses itself. It doesn't even evolve, it expresses itself in cyclical patterns, like blossoming and falling back to earth. Mm-hmm. That's the way the life force works. Being born, maturing, growing old, and dying. But especially in the life of plants, you really get a sense of the cyclical. You call that cyclicity? No.
Cyclical nature.
Cyclical nature,
yeah,
of life. Life as something manifesting. Life is, you could also compare it to the waves on a seashore. Life comes into a form and then withdraws. So life comes into all the plants in summer when you live in a moderate region, and then withdraws into the roots in winter. That's how trees and bushes and so on survive. And that's being reflected by the ascending and descending of planets relative to the horizon.
okay.
And the same goes for the moon, the sun and the moon. Mm-hmm. Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, it is, and I have 100 more
Oh,
questions.
sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the kind of like taglines of my work, or
Yeah,
kind of what I
yeah.
really want to kind of drive home to women, is Mother Earth
Mm-hmm.
is cyclical, and so are we.
Yeah.
You know, and you kind of touched on that exactly just there with the
Mm-hmm.
plants, right?
Yeah.
How in the spring things start to bud, they start to
Mm-hmm.
emerge. In the summer, you know,
Mm-hmm.
everything's in this beautiful, opulent, abundant
Mm-hmm.
nature.
Mm-hmm.
In the autumn, it starts to
Yeah.
retract. In the winter, it's the most
Yeah.
dormant.
Yeah.
And then in the spring, you know, it comes
Mm-hmm.
back up, and this just continues and continues and continues. And I work with women
Yeah.
specifically, right? Mother Earth, mother,
Mm-hmm.
feminine,
Mm-hmm.
female,
Yes.
woman.
Yes.
And so are we, women.
Yeah.
So I really work with this premise that women are cyclical beings. And
Mm-hmm.
something I'm really, really curious about is, what about men?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't work with men. My work's starting to, I would say, mature and develop in certain ways um, to to kind of look at the bigger picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been very kind of tunnel focused on
Mm-hmm.
women. That's the foundation of my work.
Yeah.
But something I'm very, very curious about, as you know, men are nature too. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just women that are nature. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious, one, about the astrological, perhaps, um, connection to, I guess you just spoke about it in kind of like that everything is cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
But then that means people are cyclical, not just women. So
Mm-hmm.
what's your take on that as a man?
Yeah. Um, I'd say that almost everything is cyclical. Um, Almost everything is cyclical, and astrology is an expression of that. Um, in the sense that nature is cyclical. And with nature, I mean not just the visible nature, I mean the life force. At least for me, that's something very true, very real, very real. The life force manifests and withdraws, and it has a cyclical nature. And all the aspects, because the life force is not just one abstract thing, but it has several identities or aspects. Some people call them archetypes. They also have a cyclical nature. They come up and they disappear. Um, you might even compare it to a play or a movie. Actors come up and disappear again.
Mm-hmm.
That's also cyclical nature. Um, and I believe the whole of nature works in a cyclical manner. And within this philosophy, you might call it, it's not just our bodies, which are obviously, at least in our culture, natural, so they are cyclical, but also the psyche is cyclical. And events are cyclical as well in their nature. Maybe not in their in exactly the way they take place, but in the themes they contain, they are cyclical. The same goes for like crops. Crops are not identical every year, but they're basically the same, like the same kind. But many crops just live for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
You could look at that at events even in this way. The only thing that is maybe not so cyclical is culture, depending on what culture you're talking about. Some cultures do have a strong notion of cycles. So they express in symbolic cultural terms their cycles, whatever they view as cycles in time, in nature, in gods, in whatever. Some cultures, however, hardly um, think in terms of cycles, and our Western culture is one of them. And they're well, it's almost asking for problems because our consciousness is shaped by our culture. However, our psyche, which is something different from our consciousness, is natural and it works cyclical, the same as our bodies. Our bodies are just human bodies, like 2,000 years ago, like 20,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The same goes for our psyche. The same goes for the way we respond to children or to elder people or to an enemy or to a friend. It's not so different. There are differences because of differences in culture.
Mm-hmm.
But differences in culture just shape the details or specific form of the ways of these universal themes take on. But friendship is still friendship. Enemies are enemies, mothers and children, elderly people. It's the same. Whether you live in China or in Africa, or you live in the Stone Age, or in India in the year 1000, or nowadays in the United States, these basic things keep returning. They are cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
And the same goes for puberty and for maturity. It is a physical thing, but also a psychological thing. Young people go through more or less the same emotional stages, even though there are influences from their culture shaping these natural inclinations. But the natural inclinations are cyclical, natural. So I tend to look at cycles not as a feminine thing,
Mm-hmm.
but as a natural thing. And I tend to look at consciousness as a cultural thing. Depending on the culture, more or less diverging from nature's cycles. That's how I tend to look at it.
Okay, I love that. It's so interesting to me. Like it brings such a new dimension. Like as I said before, the focus of my work is on women, and so I work with men in the context of relationships and relating to men. But I'm also...
you asked me a question about as a man. I forgot to answer that.
Yeah. Do you want to expand a little bit more? Or
yes, or just finish your question, but I wanted to mention this.
I have a lot of men who ask me, who are very interested in my work, who are like, okay, but I don't have a menstrual cycle, so how can I work cyclically? I want to work cyclically too. I want to have a time of slowness. And for context, the kind of work that I do is that we have as women within our bodies, we have an inner winter, an inner spring, an inner summer, and an inner autumn. And then we menstruate, that's back to our inner winter. So we're constantly moving through these inner seasons in our life, just like the earth is moving through outer seasons. And now men or women who are postmenopausal, who are not currently menstruating because of birth control, or they've not got their cycle because of a health reason or whatever, they obviously can't work with the physiological cycle of menstruation happening every month. And so how I invite them into exploring the work is through the lunar cycles. So looking at, and you said something really interesting I'd love you to share about when you spoke about cavemen and cave art relating to this. So working with the new moon as symbolic, as a representation of that inner winter time of being very, very inward. And then the full moon being the inner summertime of being very outward, kind of yin energy, yang energy, introversion, extroversion. So that's a way that men could explore this cyclical work as well through using the lunar cycles. And so there's the intersection, I think, of our work of the inner cycles, the outer cycles, and how the inner or physiological cycles are accessible to women. So it's a gateway for women into connecting more, or reconnecting, I would say, because I think there was a time where we were once very connected to this with our cyclical nature. Women have an inbuilt function. They can do it through their own bodies. Whereas for men, they're not necessarily experiencing that on a physiological or hormonal biological level on a monthly rhythm, but they can access that externally through the planets or through the moon, through astrology.
Could be, yes. I think there are several ways to do this. But to answer also the question, what about me as a man? I am a person. I'm a human being. therefore I have a natural dimension. I have, my body is just nature like everybody else's body, and my body functions cyclically. The only thing I don't have with a masculine body is a menstruational cycle. I don't have that. But my digestion works cyclically. Sleeping and waking is a cycle. Um, and there are other more subtle cycles. You mentioned, I didn't know that, but testosterone has a cycle as well, also a 24-hour cycle. I know from professional sports people, athletes, they also have a so-called biorhythm where you are in form or out of form. And they try to schedule their training and matches within this rhythm where when they're peaking in their form. Because competition has become so extreme that you need to be in your top peak position within this biorhythm if you want to have a chance at all. It's especially important in sports where you have to, how do you say that? Performance is everything. So not so much tactical insight, then that's more important. But when it just comes on running as fast as possible or cycling as fast as possible, in these, then your biorhythm is really important. So that, I know that many men athletes in sport have this. Yes, you could say that women have an advantage from a masculine point of view because they have a menstrual cycle. So you have a very undeniable physical reminder of your cyclical nature, which you do have anyway, even without the menstruation, even as a woman without menstruation, because we are all about cycles. You could, of course, use astrological cycles, like, for instance, the cycle of the moon, the monthly cycle, which is more of a psychological cycle. You could do that to get acquainted with the whole notion of cycles. For me, it's a bit like an approach where you go from the outside, you try to enter, to go into something. It's a bit rational in a sense. You could also just observe yourself, but maybe that's harder. I'm telling this because the problem, to me at least, in our culture, Western culture, seems to be, especially for men, you are never encouraged to sense your nature, your cycles. I think that's the underlying problem. Yeah. It's not that masculine being, not so much masculine thinking, but just masculine being isn't cyclical. For me, it's our culture is very linear and very purpose oriented, result and target oriented, and not so much oriented towards attuning to cycles. But if you decide for whatever reason as a man, sometimes you have to. It's almost like menstruation. It's what happened to me and what happened also to men that I have known throughout my life. You might say more sensitive men. I know the men I'm talking about were usually artists or poets, but they used to have sleepless nights around full moon. And I have that, a sensitivity to the new moon, especially the last days before new moon. I feel depressed. I feel very down. The difference from new moon to new moon, and I know as an astrologer that has to do with, okay, what point is this new moon approaching? But in general, this dark energy of the new moon has a depressing effect on me. I couldn't help noticing. I didn't need astrology to remind me of that. Astrology was actually a way to understand this. Yeah. And there are other cycles. There are also cycles throughout the year. Many people, men and women, have what they call, at least in the Netherlands, they call it the spring depression. I don't know if that's a word you know in English. And it's the literal translation from Dutch is spring depression. It's a reaction many people have after being so many months in winter, where it's really dark, not many hours of sun. Um, it exhausts people, especially the somewhat more sensitive people. And it's very common knowledge. All doctors know it. Yeah, spring depression. You need some, light therapy or whatever.
Yeah.
They invented things for this therapies because it's so commonly known. And men have that as well as women. So that's a cycle connected to the seasons. Most people are much happier in spring, especially spring. I know from people who can see auras that auras of people are especially vibrant and big also in spring. Just in general. Really sensitive people walking in the street notice this. That in spring the auras are really sparkly. Very different from the auras in winter. It's probably the contrast. So it's not even in summer that they're the brightest, but in spring. Because I think the life force is anticipating summer.
Yeah. But it's the rebirth, isn't it? Winter's very much the death phase. Same within our bodies. Like in the winter, it's that death phase, the little death. And then the spring is the emergence. It's the rebirth. And rebirth is life, It's not the peak of life like summer is, but it's hopeful. It holds possibility. It holds newness. And that makes people sparkle.
Yeah. I think it's also the emotional reaction towards this coming back of the life force, of the light, the warmth, and everything. So I think that's the universal in terms of that's universal to everything that's natural, and that's all humans. But the problem, if you want to look at it as a problem, can be culture.
Okay, so we're actually going to end this episode there. We did keep the camera rolling for another 10 minutes or so. But I think that's a conversation for another day because this episode's already long enough. So thank you for watching today. We would love to hear your feedback. Leave a comment underneath this video. Let us know what you thought about this kind of deeper philosophical, psychological conversation. You said something, Vincent, about how astrology is really rooted in a lot of philosophy.
Yes.
And so I think it will be very cool to do a series moving forward from here with this kind of being the pilot, with these connections between astrology, psychology, philosophy, and whatever else might come up from here.
Yes. That will be great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us again today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching, and